Hello guys, welcome back. I cut the previous video short and rather very abruptly. I apologize for that. That is because I felt like it was long enough, okay? And besides that, I had a disturbance, okay? So I apologize for that. On the previous video, we looked at the introductory terminology. We looked at the overview of how the nervous system works, the importance of the nervous system, the different components of the nervous system, how the nervous system is divided into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. We defined what an impulse is and how it works. And we looked at the structure and the position of the three main types of neurons: the motor neuron, sensory neuron, as well as the interneuron. So please go back and watch that video very thoroughly. Take notes, you guys. Please. That video is very important for you to understand the functioning of the nervous system. On this video, we are going to be looking at the structure of the neurons, the functions of the different parts, and we are going to be doing assessment questions. Okay, now, before I start, it is very important for you to be able to draw a structure of the motor neuron and a structure of the sensory neuron. If you've been practicing with previous question papers, I'm sure you can attest that there have been instances that candidates will be asked to draw the structure of either the motor neuron and the sensory neuron and provide labels for them. Okay, so please do yourself a huge favor. Please learn how to draw and label a sensory neuron and a motor neuron. Okay, for your final exam. Please learn that. And remember, when you're asked to draw, there must be a heading and there must be labels. Okay, and that you may be asked to draw for around 5 to 6 marks. So that is very important, guys. Please. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we have our motor neuron. That is my caption or heading. And on the right-hand side, we have, excuse me for that, my iPad is giving me problems, you guys. So sorry for that. Back to the slide. And then there we have the sensory. Neuron. How can I tell the difference? Okay, I will let you know at the end of the slide. How can you tell the difference between the motor and the sensory neuron? Okay, let's look at the different parts. So firstly, we have these structures over there. These are called dendrites. Okay, these are called dendrites. And the dendrites, how can you tell which parts are the dendrites? Okay, this part over there, and there is the nucleus of the cell body. The dendrites always come before the cell body. Okay? Before the cell body. All right? Now, what dendrites do is that they receive impulses. Guys, there's a lot of mistakes in my slide. Receives impulses. I apologize. Receives impulses from the previous neuron and transmits them towards the cell body. So this whole part there is the cell body, and the part there is the cell body. Okay, so dendrites come before the cell body. Any part that comes before the cell body is the dendrites. Okay, so the dendrites function, receives impulses from the neuron before and transmits them towards the cell body. Okay, next part we are going to look at is that part over there, that whole part over there, and that whole part over there. What did we say that was? We said that is the cell body. Okay, now the cell body contains organelles that perform specific functions for the cell or for the neuron. The organelles that are prescribed for you to know by your exam guidelines are the nucleus. The nucleus is over there on the motor neuron, and then on the sensory neuron, there is the nucleus over there. Okay, so the nucleus is there, nucleus, and then on the sensory neuron, there is the nucleus. All right, so what does the nucleus do? We know, just like any other nucleus of any other cell, the nucleus contains genetic material, or it contains, you can say, contains DNA for one mark. And what does that DNA do? That DNA controls the production of proteins. The DNA controls the production of proteins, or you can say controls protein synthesis. That's where the second mark is. Second part that you must know about is the cytoplasm. So the cytoplasm is there. Cytoplasm. Oopsie. Cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is the water of the cell body, okay, that is surrounding the nucleus. What does it do? It contains ribosomes that facilitate the process of protein synthesis. Okay, that's what the cytoplasm primarily does. And then we move on to the next part of the neuron. So the cell body, two parts that are important for you to know. They are prescribed for you to know. In terms of the cell body, your exam guidelines say you must know the function of the nucleus and the general function of the cytoplasm. The next part is what we call the dendrites. Remember, the impulse, we said, from the previous neuron, it enters through the dendrites. The dendrites receive the impulse from the previous, neuron, and it takes them to the cell body. Now, from the cell body, the impulse moves through the axons, okay? The axon. What is the function of the axon? Sends impulses away from the cell body. So the impulse will travel down like that, down through the axon, and it will leave this neuron and go to the next neuron. So dendrite to the cell body, out through the axons. That's how the impulse moves. So in the sensory neuron, as you can see, the parts before the cell body, we said is the whole part, guys, the whole part is the dendrite. Then it moves to the cell body, after the cell body would be the axon, which leads the impulse away from the cell body to the next neuron. Okay. And then lastly, covering the axon is, as you can see, please take time and check where the label is. Over the axon, covering the axon, is the myelin sheath. Okay? What does the myelin sheath do? The myelin sheath is a fat, scientifically we say adipose. It's a fatty or adipose substance covering the neuron. Okay, that's what it is. What does it do? One, it speeds up the transmission of impulses, meaning it makes sure that impulses move quickly throughout the neuron. It ensures that impulses travel in one direction or a unilateral direction. What do we mean in one direction? Meaning from dendrite to cell body to axon. Okay. And then lastly, it provides electrical insulation for the neuron. What does electrical insulation means? Because it is a fatty substance or an adipose substance, an insulator, remember, is a substance that does not allow electricity to pass through it. So it blocks the the impulses from moving inside the neuron. The impulses must not leave the neuron and go in many different directions. No. That could never happen. We don't want that to happen. So because the neuron is covered by the myelin sheath insulates the impulse. Remember, impulse is electricity. It insulates the impulse, making sure that it travels in a unilateral or travels in one direction. Okay. Okay, sorry guys. This iPad. Okay, my iPad is giving me problems, you guys, so sorry for that. So here, you must know how to draw either the motor neuron or the sensory neuron. How can you tell them apart? How I have kind of visually differentiated them. The cell body of the sensory neuron is peeking out, but the cell body of the motor neuron is at the head of the neuron. Okay? So it's dendrites, then the motor neuron. If you were to draw a stick diagram of the motor neuron, this is what you would do. You would draw the axon, right? And then you would draw the cell body, and these would, like a lollipop, these would be the dendrites. So, as you can see, the cell body is at the head. But if you were to draw a stick diagram of the sensory neuron, you would draw dendrite, cell body sticks out like that, and then axon like that. So the cell body of the sensory neuron is protruding out, as you can see there. But the cell body of the motor neuron is at the head. I don't know if this makes sense. Kind of makes sense to me. It works for me. But what's important is for you guys to be able to tell these apart. Okay. All right, guys. Like I said, my iPad is giving me issues. So I'm going to have to do this every single time I need to clean my screen. All right. Moving on. Let's check how impulses move throughout the neuron. Question number 1. Which neuron is this? Is this the motor neuron or is it the sensory neuron? The answer to this is the motor neuron. Okay, why do I say it is the motor neuron? Look at the cell body. Here is the cell body. It's at the head of the neuron. It is not sticking out there. It's not sticking out there. Okay? It is not sticking out there. It is at the head of the neuron. So this is the motor neuron. Sorry, I have to again clean. This is the only way I can do that. I'm so sorry. Okay, now we said we are going to be looking at how impulses move throughout the neuron. Okay, when we label, remember, these head like structures are the dendrites. Right? And there is the cell body. We have the axon. And covering the axon is the myelin sheath. Oops, sheath. How do you spell myelin sheath? Myelin sheath. Okay, now impulses move from 1, dendrite, 2, cell body, 3, axon, and they go to the next neuron. Let's check. So here's the impulse. It comes in through the dendrites, passes through the cell body, and then out the axon to terminal branches, and then it moves to the other neuron. Let's check one more time. Dendrites leads the impulse to the cell body. From the cell body, axon. Axon leads impulses away from the cell body to the next neuron. Okay, guys? So like we said, here are 3 neurons. We have neuron number, okay. So we have neuron number 1, neuron number 2, neuron number 3. Let's see if you can tell them apart. Neuron number 1, the cell body is sticking out. So that is the sensory neuron. Okay? Neuron number 3, the cell body is at the head. There, at the head. So that would be the motor neuron. And between the motor neuron and the sensory neuron, we have the interneuron. So how do impulses move? Like we said. So look at the sensory neuron. Impulses move from the receptor. That is the sensory neuron. Dendrites, cell body, axon. Then to the next neuron, which is the interneuron, from the dendrites, cell body, axon. Then the third neuron, which is the motor neuron, dendrites, cell body, axon, and then the impulse would go to the effector organ, like we have seen in the previous slide. Okay. So lastly, how do impulses move from one neuron to the next neuron? Here's the answer. Impulses move from the axons of one neuron to the dendrites. Remember, axons lead impulses away from the cell body to the next neuron. You guys. Okay. From the axons of one neuron to the dendrites of another neuron by what we call neurotransmitters through a synaptic gap. What does this all mean, guys? What does this all mean? Let's check. Firstly, what is a synapse or a synaptic gap? A synapse or a synaptic gap is a microscopic gap. So it's a very tiny gap that can't be seen with the naked eye. We find this gap between the axons of one neuron and the dendrites of another neuron. That is what a synaptic gap is. So a synapse, the significance, the importance of a synapse, guys, is that it speeds up transmission of impulses and it ensures that impulses move in one direction. That is the importance of a synapse. Let's take a visual of this. Now, there are the impulses moving. As you can see, let me just pause. As you can see, the impulse moves dendrite, like we said, cell body, like we said, and moves out the axon. Right? Now, at the end of the axon, we have the terminal branches of the axon. Follow it? Terminal branches of the axon. So, let's check. So, at that point there, we see impulses moving from the axon of neuron 1. And it moves to the dendrite of neuron 2. It doesn't look as though there is a gap there, but there is a gap. When you check at this point over here, this point over there, you can see that the dendrites and the axons of the two neurons are not connected. That gap is called a synapse. It's called a synapse or a synaptic gap. Okay, let me just clean the screen again. So sorry. Okay, so I want you to follow the impulse. There is the impulse moving down the axon of one neuron. And then the impulse is taken to the, let me pause again. The impulse is taken to the dendrite of another neuron, as you can see. If we magnify, so this is the dendrite, axon of one neuron, and this is the dendrite of another neuron. This gap over here is called a synapse or a synaptic gap. All right. Now we said impulses are electrical in form. Okay. So impulses are supposed to move like that and get to the dendrite of another neuron. But we know that impulses do not, or electricity cannot travel freely through air. Okay? So, in this gap called the synaptic gap or the synapse, impulses change from being electrical to being chemical. They are passed from one neuron to the next neuron through the synapse by chemical messengers that are called neurotransmitters. So what you see there in the synaptic gap are called neurotransmitters. Okay? So the impulse has changed from being an electrical message to a chemical message, but when it gets now to the next neuron, it is now back to being an electrical message. So those are neurotransmitters that take the message from one neuron to the next neuron. So that's how impulses move. There we go again. Axon of one neuron, dendrites of another neuron. So that's how impulses move from one neuron to the next neuron. Let's go back to the answer. The question was, how do impulses move from one neuron to the next neuron? Guys, I'm so sorry. I am having issues, technical issues. We're just going to have to make it work. So sorry for going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Okay, how do impulses move from one neuron to the next? We said impulses move from axons of one neuron to dendrites of another neuron, right? They are moved by neurotransmitters that are found through a synaptic gap. Okay, what is a synapse? A synapse or a synaptic gap is a microscopic gap between the axons of one neuron and the dendrites of another neuron. Function or importance of a synapse: it speeds up, one, the transmission or the movement of impulses. Two, it makes sure that impulses move in one direction. So just like the myelin sheath, basically. Okay, now let's have a look again. There we go. So we have two neurons here, neuron 1 and we have neuron 2. Okay, we said that impulses move from dendrite, right? Dendrites take impulses from the previous neuron towards the cell body, and then from the cell body the impulse moves through the axon. The axon takes impulses away from the cell body to the next neuron. But between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of another neuron. So here would be axon of one neuron, of neuron 1, and there would be dendrite of neuron 2. There is a microscopic gap. This microscopic gap is known as a synapse. So impulses move from the axon of one neuron to the dendrite of another neuron through the synapse by neurotransmitters. I hope I spelled that correctly. All right, there is the synapse. There it is highlighted, and those are your neurotransmitters. Okay. End of the lesson. Now let's look at some exam type activities, you guys. So these activities will be based on this particular video and the previous video. So look at those two lessons, and then after that, feel free to do the activity with me. Remember, you guys, you must pause, look at the question, do the activity yourself, and then check how if your answers are correct. Okay, guys? Now, the activity reads 1.4, the diagram below represents the structure of a neuron. When you get a structure like this, what must you do always? You must label the structure on your question paper. Please study the diagram first. Don't even look at the diagram. At the questions first, guys. Study the diagram. Take time to study the diagram. Okay. A, B, C, D, E, F. Let us label. Part A, it is before the cell body. Before the cell body. So this would be the dendrites. Part B, part of the cell body, but it is inside. That will be the nucleus. Part F is also part of the cell body, but outside the nucleus. What would part F then be? That will be the cytoplasm. And then holding the cytoplasm in check is part E. That would be the cell membrane. And then we have part C. Look at where the label line is. It is showing that stalky part inside. That would be the axon. And then part D is covering the axon. That would be the myelin sheath. All right. What type of a neuron is this one, guys? Look at the cell body. The cell body is on the head. That would be a motor neuron. Yes. Okay, let's look at the questions. Question number 1. Name the type of neuron in the diagram. Like I said, the cell body is not protruding out like that. So that is a motor neuron. Yes. Second question, identify the part that... Okay, identify part B. Part B, nucleus. Part F, cytoplasm. Part A, we've already said, is the dendrites. It comes before the cell body. Do you have another question? Yes. Give the letter and name. Guys, please do not selectively read. Read the instruction very carefully. Otherwise, you are going to lose marks. The letter and the name. And you'll see the mark allocation is going to be 2 marks because you are required 1 mark letter, 1 mark name. Give the letter and name of the part that transmits impulses away from the cell body. Away. So there is the cell body, away from the cell body. That will be part, that would be part C, 1 mark, letter, name, exon, 1 mark. Insulates and speeds up the transmission of impulses. Insulates. Which part provides electrical insulation for the neuron? That would be part D, which is the myelin sheath. Last question. Name the condition caused by the progressive degradation of part D. On this particular lesson, we haven't dealt with the two conditions or diseases associated with the nervous system, which are prescribed for you according to exam guidelines: multiple sclerosis and Alzheimer's disease. Okay, those are the two diseases that are associated with the nervous system that are prescribed for you. So, the one that over time, the myelin sheaths of the brain degrade, meaning they wear off, therefore causing impulses to move in multiple directions, is multiple sclerosis. Okay, so when the myelin sheath wears off or degrades, remember what's the function of the myelin sheath? The myelin sheath, if this is your axon, the myelin sheath covers the axon, for example. The myelin sheath covers the axon. The myelin sheath prevents the impulse from escaping in multiple directions, right? So it insulates, meaning it makes sure that the impulses does not escape and go in multiple directions. Therefore, when the myelin sheath degenerates, or when the myelin sheath wears off, then impulses move in multiple directions. And the condition or the disease is called multiple sclerosis. I hope that makes sense. All right. So this is where we were. So, multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease that breaks down myelin sheaths and eventually destroys neurons. So when there is a breakdown of the myelin sheath, or when it wears off, or when it degenerates, then it causes the impulses to move in multiple directions. So we call that multiple sclerosis. Look at the neurons at the top left. The neurons at the top left of the screen. The one on the furthest left, its myelin sheath is intact. But the one on the right, the myelin sheath is wearing off, as you can see. So impulses are able to escape in multiple directions. And that can't be good because the impulse must move in one direction. Remember, it must move from dendrite, cell body, axon, then next neuron. However, if the myelin sheath wears off, then the impulses will move in multiple directions. Then we call that multiple sclerosis. Okay, the causes. So, because it's an autoimmune disease, the immune system basically attacks the myelin sheath. Nobody knows why this happens. There have been suggestions by the medical and scientific community, but nobody knows for sure. Okay, it can be triggered by a virus, can be triggered by environmental issues like radiation and the likes, and genetics increases the likelihood for somebody getting multiple sclerosis. Symptoms: the person will have loss of speech, inability to walk, numbness on arms and legs, loss of vision or double vision, tingling sensation, fatigue or weakness, loss of memory, which is very sad, emotional instability, so the person has these mood swings, and loss of bladder and bowel control, meaning the person cannot control their bladder and they can't control their their bowel, their feces control. Okay. All right, so this is multiple sclerosis. The other one is Alzheimer's disease. The other one is Alzheimer's disease, you guys. The other one is Alzheimer's disease. Now, this one is when the nerve tissue of the brain appears to waste away. With multiple sclerosis, the myelin sheath of the neurons are wasting away or degenerating or withering. But here, with Alzheimer's disease, the tissue of the brain is wasting away. Look at this diagram over here. Here we have a healthy brain, but look at this part over here. You can see that the brain on the left, let's say brain B, let's say brain A there, the tissue is wasting away. The tissue is degenerating. So, yeah. How to tell these two apart, guys? Alzheimer's disease, the brain tissue is wasting away. With multiple sclerosis, what is wasting away? It is the myelin sheaths of the neurons that are wasting away. That's basically it that you have to know. Nothing else. Alzheimer's disease is caused by shortage of neurotransmitters. Symptoms, again, memory loss, confusion, diminished intellectual ability. Of course, you're not going to be able to think well, to reason well, to remember certain things because your brain is basically shrinking. Increased aggression, irritability, mood swings, loss of speech, loss of body function. At some point, you can't control certain bodily functions. Okay. So with that being said, let's go to activity 2. Right, now, activity 2, we have 4 neurons, as we can see over there. Excuse me. Right. Now, with our neurons, we must be able to identify the 4 neurons, which neurons they are. Okay. Remember what I said? The indicator, always look at the cell body. If the cell body is protruding out, that is the sensory neuron. Okay. So this one, cell body is protruding out. That one, cell body is also protruding out. So neuron number 1 is a sensory neuron. Neuron number 4 is also a sensory neuron. Okay, when you look at the cell body of neuron number 2 and 3, you will see that the cell body is on the head there. Gosh, guys, excuse these random lines. I'm having issues with my iPad. There. Therefore, neuron number 2 and 3 are which neurons? They are motor neurons because their cell bodies are basically on the head. Okay, now let's look at other differences, other things that we can see. When you look at neuron number 1, the sensory neuron, and neuron number 4, another sensory neuron, what can you tell? What is the difference? Neuron number 1 has, as you can see, it has a myelin. So sorry for that. We said sensory neuron. We said sensory neuron. We said motor neuron. We said motor neuron. We see that by the cell bodies. When you look at sensory neuron 1, sensory neuron 1 has a myelin sheath, but sensory neuron number 4 does not have a myelin sheath, right? And which disease did we say is associated with the neurons not having a myelin sheath, or their myelin sheath degenerate? We said it is multiple sclerosis. So, neuron number 4, because of the absence of a myelin sheath, belongs to a person with multiple sclerosis. It is a sensory neuron belonging to a person that has multiple sclerosis. Neuron number 1 is a sensory neuron of a normal person. Let's look at the motor neurons. Neuron number 2 and neuron number 3. Neuron number 3 is a normal motor neuron, but neuron number 2 does not have a myelin sheath. Therefore, neuron number 2 is a neuron belonging to a person with multiple multiple sclerosis. So we have 2 neurons that do not have myelin sheaths. Therefore, they belong to a person with multiple sclerosis. Motor neuron 2 and sensory neuron 4. Okay, let's look at the questions. Give only the numbers 1, 2, 3, or 4 of two neurons, that A, transports impulses from the receptor to the central nervous system. So position and function. From the receptor to the central nervous system. Those are sensory neurons. And which neurons did we identify as sensory neurons? We said it's neuron number 1 and neuron number 4. Let's check if that's the correct answer. Yes. 1. Remember, guys, the question says 2 neurons. Marker location is 2. B, have a faster transmission of impulses. Faster transmission of impulses. Now let's think about it. Which part of a neuron speeds up the transmission of impulses? It is the myelin sheath. So the only neurons that would have a faster transmission of impulses should be neurons that contain neurons that contain a myelin sheath, which is neuron number 1. It has a myelin sheath, and neuron number 3 also has a myelin sheath. Let's check if that's the correct answer. correct. Subquestion C, most likely represents a person with multiple sclerosis. Most likely represents a person with multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis, the neurons do not have myelin sheaths, or the myelin sheaths are degenerating. Which neurons above do not have a myelin sheath? That would be neuron number 2 and neuron number 4. Let's check if that's correct. Absolutely. Right. Following question. The diagram below represents a type of neuron found in human body. We have neuron 1 and we have neuron 2. Let us study the diagram. Okay. C comes before the cell body. So C would be the dendrites. Okay, at this point, I'm going to stop writing because my iPad is doing all of these things and I don't know why. And then we have B. B, please make a note, is the axon. Please check, guys. Please check. Be very careful. Check where the label line is. It is showing inside the covering. So B, I'm assuming, is the axon, and A is the terminal branches of the axon. It's still part of the axon. Okay, and both these neurons, neuron A and neuron B, you would agree with me, are motor neurons. But B, neuron 1 has a myelin sheath and neuron 2 does not have a myelin sheath. Therefore, neuron 2 belongs to a person with multiple sclerosis. Okay, let's look at the questions. Identify the type of neuron shown. Answer, motor neuron. We've already said that. 7.2, using the letters A, B, and C, only give the correct sequence. Now we want a sequence, correct sequence for the transmission of an impulse along neuron 1. Remember, impulses move from dendrite, cell body, axon. Dendrite, cell body, axon. Right? So dendrite is, so it moves in that direction. It moves in that direction. So it moves from C, to B to A. So CBA is the correct answer, not ABC. Dendrite, cell body, axon. Always remember that. So let's check if that's the correct answer. Yes. CBA, 2 marks. It's all or nothing. Following question, explain how the speed of transmission of impulses will differ for neuron 1 and neuron 2. Explain, 4 marks. Let's look at the answer. The speed of transmission in an impulse will be slower in neuron 2. Why? Because it lacks a myelin sheath or does not have electrical insulation. So explain, you state if it's going to be fast or slow and provide a reason why. Okay, so it will be slower in neuron 2, 1 mark. Why? Because it lacks a myelin sheath, or an option, you can say because it does not have electrical insulation. Remember, it is 4 marks. We must explain the difference in neuron 1 and in neuron 2. The speed of transmission on neuron 1 will be faster because it has a myelin sheath which provides electrical insulation. Second mark. Okay. Is there another question? Yes, there is. Explain why a person will feel the stimulus. Feel the stimulus. Feel the stimulus. Part A. Part 1 of the sentence. But not be able to respond. Part 2 of this question. Explain why a person will feel the stimulus but will not be able to respond if only this type of neuron is damaged. So if the motor neuron is damaged, why would the person feel the stimulus but not be able to respond to the stimulus if the motor neuron is damaged? Now, this question, guys, it requires you to think of the function of the motor neuron. Remember what the motor neuron does and where it is positioned. The motor neuron is positioned between the central nervous system and the effector organ. Its function is to take a reaction impulse from the brain to the effector organ. So interpretation happens in the brain or spinal cord, and it will tell the effector organ to react in a certain way by sending an impulse via the motor neuron. Let's just remind ourselves. Right. From the previous video, we said that the nervous system works like this. We have the receptor. Guys, let me write there, maybe receptor. Then the function of the receptor is to receive the stimulus, right, and convert it into an impulse. Then the impulse is taken to the sensory neuron. Then from the sensory neuron to the central nervous system to be interpreted. Then motor neuron. Then effector, if you can still remember. Now, the sensory neuron takes impulses to the central nervous system. The motor neuron takes reaction impulses to the central nervous system. To the effector organ. Now, the brain in the central nervous system that's where interpretation of the stimulus takes place. So if you put your finger on a hot plate, the receptor organ receives the heat and converts it to an impulse. Then the sensory neuron takes that impulse to the central nervous system to be interpreted as danger. So the interpretation of pain happens there. Okay? So that's why the person will feel the pain. So the impulse is taken to where the impulse is interpreted. So the person will feel the pain. But because the motor neuron is damaged, the person will not be able to react because the impulse will not be taken to the effector organ. Remember, the effector organ is the organ that reacts to the stimulus. Okay. So the impulse is interpreted at the spinal cord or the brain That's why the person feels the pain. So the impulse is taken to the center of interpretation. But because the motor neuron, which was supposed to take the reaction impulse to the effector organ, is damaged, the person will not be able to react because that point of passage to the effector organ is damaged. Answer: the stimulus will be received and converted into an impulse by the receptor organ. The sensory neuron will transmit the impulse to the central nervous system, where interpretation of pain will take place. So that's why the person feels the pain. But, however, since the motor neuron is damaged, the impulse will not be sent to the effector organ. Thus, the person will not be able to respond to the stimulus. Okay, so the last bullet does not carry marks because that's literally in the question. But that's the response. Okay, guys, this is a very common question. So please take a screenshot and practice it. Okay, you guys, that's the end of the video. On the following video, I will be doing the reflex arc, taking it a step further, and we'll be doing the reflex arc, reflex action. What's the difference between the two terms? And we will, of course, be doing assessment questions on that as well. So thank you so much for watching, and see you on the next video. Goodbye.